Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. A lot going on this week. There's a war going on. I'll talk about that and how it intersects with U.S. corruption issues. Plus, we have new incredible documents from Fauci's agency about China and COVID that you're going to want to hear more about. And we sued on behalf of a magistrate who was fired for blowing the whistle about a murder and a rape. Just outrageous soft on crime policies that's resulting in those blowing the whistle being punished. First up is the big war. We had, as we all know, the Russians have invaded Ukraine, and there's intense fighting going on. Now, if you watched my update last week, I highlighted for you one of the reasons I think that Putin invaded Ukraine, and there are myriad reasons, right, as to why it happened. But one of the reasons is because Putin looks at the United States and sees a corrupted class of politicians that have been running this country more or less for the last decade and a half. During the Obama administration, he had the Obama gang in his back pocket. He was specifically giving money, he and his allies, to the Clinton machine, who was the putative nominee for a period of time and successor to Obama. Then you had a Russian operative working with Hillary Clinton, according to Durham. He was working on the Fusion GPS fake dossier to smear Trump. All those lies were made up in part by this Russian operative. And then, of course, you've had the Russians helping Joe Biden with business for his family. Joe Biden's son, Hunter, received, according to a Senate report, $3.5 million from the widow of a Russian oligarch. And Burisma, as I've highlighted, is a Ukrainian company that was Russia-leaning. It was affiliated with Russia interests in Ukraine. So Putin sees all these folks on the take, and the other challenges we're facing at home as a result of Joe Biden's general weakness, caused in part by his medical infirmity that is quite obvious to everyone, his cognitive challenges, and he sees a weakened West that is weakened by its own energy policies that are pursuing a radical ideological agenda while destroying our own energy production that could be internal to us, that wouldn't make us reliant, as Putin evidently thought he could leverage that reliance in invading Ukraine. And the other corruption issue is that Ukraine was used as a fulcrum by the Obama-Clinton-Biden gang to try to destroy Trump during his presidency. Because you remember, Trump was investigating what was going on in Ukraine. He wanted it investigated because he knew Ukraine was part of this cabal that was trying to drive him from office or involve itself in the elections. Namely, mostly by helping Joe Biden and smearing President Trump. And for that, they tried to impeach and remove him. So by turning Ukraine into a plaything for the deep state fell into the narrative that Putin had been weaving, that Ukraine was a client or vassal of the United States. And in large measure, he was proven right with the corruption that Ukraine was involved in with the support of the anti-Trump State Department and other political people here in Washington, D.C. And so that has led in part to the war. And of course, we know why Putin wants Ukraine for other reasons. His hyper-nationalism, his efforts to reassemble what he perceives to be the Russian Empire. He's a communist at heart. And communists never settle with just running one country. They are transnational. So that feeds into what happened. So there's a lot going on in the invasion of Ukraine. And I don't mean to say, well, Putin invaded Ukraine because Biden's corrupt. No, I'm saying that the corruption I'm talking about is a contributing factor, a significant one in my view, to the war and the decision by Putin to take this, what I think is largely seen to be an outrageous act in invading another country. Whatever the disputes are, we should at least try to settle them without going to war against an entire nation, especially when the disputes are so easily settled at the negotiation table if the parties are truly interested in doing so. So that's where we stand. And one of the other big issues out there is they're saying anyone who's been critical of the U.S. craziness in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, anyone who says, well, you know, let's take a deep breath here and see what's really going on, they say you're a Russian, you love Putin, which is of course garbage. And it's usually the crowd that was in bed with Putin saying that those who are critical of the Biden administration's handling of this crisis are somehow traitors. I mean, it's so typical of the left, isn't it? They accuse others of doing what they have done. And in this case, they were happy to ally themselves with Putin. And our Michael Morrison did a piece. He's an investigative journalist, senior investigative journalist at Judicial Watch, and he's been following the Clintons for decades. And he did a piece highlighting the Clintons' Russia-Ukraine grift. I have the piece here, and I'm going to read it in part to you because it nicely highlights Judicial Watch's work, because Hillary was out there talking about how anti-Putin she is, and those who helped Russia need to be held accountable. She was getting money directly from them. Judicial Watch broke the story of former President Bill Clinton's multi-million-dollar haul from speech fees while his wife presided over U.S. foreign policy as Secretary of State. In a joint investigation with the Washington Times, I think it was the Daily Caller, Judicial Watch found that Mr. Clinton gave 215 speeches, taking in $48 million, according to documents obtained by Judicial Watch in a Freedom of Information Act request and litigation. State Department officials charged with reviewing Clinton's proposed speeches, remember they were supposed to vet them, did not object to a single one of those speeches abroad, even though there were obviously many of them touched on our foreign policy in a way that would cause, well, the problems they're causing now. The speech fees included a jaw-dropping $500,000 check from the Russia investment firm Renaissance Capital for a single speech. Years later, leaked emails revealed that the close connection between Renaissance Capital and Putin's inner circle. Reuters reported that the emails showed that top Renaissance officials were awarding an unspecified stake in the firm to Matthias Warnig, a close Putin ally. Warnig served as an officer in East Germany's Stasi secret police at the same time as Putin was a KGB officer in Dresden in the 1980s. So Renaissance was an arm of the Putin regime, and they gave the Clinton gang $500,000 while Hillary was Secretary of State. All that was exposed by Judicial Watch. Clintons also cultivated a relationship with Putin-connected oligarch Victor Velksberg, who donated an estimated $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation. In 2018, he was one of 7 oligarchs sanctioned by the Trump administration for activities related to the Russian government's malign activity, including continuing to occupy Crimea and instigate violence in eastern Ukraine. So there you have the Ukraine connection in part. And according to findings by our colleague and friend and investigative reporter John Solomon, I don't mean literal colleague, but he's certainly allied in terms of doing great investigative journalism. Velksberg was also involved in the Uranium One controversy, another lucrative source for the Clinton network. Uranium One, you may recall, was a Canadian uranium mining firm with U.S. holdings that the Russians wanted to buy. The vehicle for the purchase was Rosatom, the Russian State Atomic Energy Corporation. Because uranium is a strategic asset, our U.S. government is supposed to approve the deal. And what happened is this oligarch started giving money to the Clinton Foundation. At the time of Bill Clinton's, for instance, $500,000 speaking engagement, the former president sought permission from the State Department to meet with Velsberg and Arkady Dvorkovich, a senior official at Rosatom, during the Moscow trip. Russia needed sign-off from the State Department on the interagency panel responsible for deciding the fate of the deal. So what happens is, in order to approve this deal, this Russia involvement in Uranium One, there's a kind of a group of senior agency officials, including the Secretary of State, who have to sign off on the deal. Now, you don't need to be a genius to connect the dots between that $500,000 speaking fee, because Renaissance was involved in Uranium One, as best as I recall, a trip to Moscow, and Russia's goal of quartering a big chunk of the global uranium market. Now, the sale of Uranium One was approved by both the U.S. and Canadian governments, again, after all that cash lubricated the decision-making process. In the years surrounding the deal, including before it became public knowledge, entities connected to Uranium One donated $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. The Clintons had a Ukrainian benefactor as well. So everyone had a stake with the Clintons. They were open for business. According to a New York Times report, Ukrainian oligarch and steel baron Viktor Pinchuk steered between $10 million and $25 million to the Clinton Foundation, loaned his private plane to the Clintons, flew to LA to attend Mr. Clinton's big 65th birthday party, went to a dinner party at the Clintons' home, and he hired a Clinton consultant to arrange meetings with the State Department to discuss Ukraine. And of course, he also donated $150,000 to the Clinton Foundation. Now, of course, this guy Pinchuk has been involved in controversies in Ukraine for years. But the whole point is that you've had all of these foreign interests, including from Ukraine and Russia, entering our U.S. political system through donations and trying to influence our U.S. political system through donations to the Clinton Foundation. Now, we've highlighted recently how the Clinton Foundation's monies have gone down. They dropped precipitously over the last few years. I think they're down something like 75%. I don't remember the exact number. Well, I just did an op-ed on it. You would think I'd remember, but it's out there. We can provide a link to the op-ed highlighting that it's no surprise that once they were out of power, their fundraising would go down because it was a vehicle to raise money for her political aspirations. It was a front. And sure enough, it's announced, I think literally this afternoon, as I present to you now, that the Clinton Foundation is going to be having their big leadership summits again. Remember those big Clinton Global Initiative type operations where everyone came, gave cash to the Clintons, and they'd have these type of summit events? Well, they're back. What does that suggest to you? Clinton Inc. is open for business again. They will be taking money from all comers, and that Hillary Clinton, in my view, wants to evidently run for office again because usually the monies that are raised for these foundation and other efforts are to elevate her name as she's preparing for political office. So the Clinton cash machine, it's never been held fully accountable. It's been held partly accountable because Judicial Watch's exposure of it, because you may recall separately that Judicial Watch exposed the pay-to-play scandal that the Clinton Foundation was involved in when Hillary was at the State Department. You had the Clinton Foundation, despite promises that there would be a bright line between the Clinton Foundation and the State Department, using the State Department to get donors special favors. And Judicial Watch's FOIA requests uncovered all of that. And that contributed as much as anything to Hillary Clinton's downfall in 2016. And of course, Judicial Watch separately and relatedly, though, have come up with Hillary Clinton's emails that she had been trying to hide, each and every one of them, from the American people for years. But Judicial Watch's persistence and consistency and in relentless heavy lifting uncovered the Clinton email scandal. So this was, that was the most significant non-governmental investigation, frankly, in modern American history. It led to the uncovering of the Clinton email scandal, the pay-to-play scandal. It led, one of the consequences was the unraveling of her presidential campaign. But my discussion here today focuses on how, in order to avoid that, the consequences of that criminality that we uncovered, she concocted the Russia smears. So there was never any Trump connection to Russia as alleged by the Clinton machine and Obama and Biden, but there was plenty connection with both Biden and Clinton. And that needs to be front and center. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, that corruption, I'm sure, was part of the calculations that Putin went through in deciding whether or not to invade Ukraine. So just to conclude, national security and corruption are interlinked. When our public officials and our leading government officials are corrupted by foreign money or other reasons, our enemies and friends keep careful tabs on that and calculate accordingly. And sometimes the calculations lead to death and destruction, as we're seeing in Ukraine. So what is Judicial Watch going to be doing? We're obviously investigating everything we can related to Ukraine with Freedom of Information Acts, requests and litigation that still relates to the underlying corruption with the Bidens and the Clintons. We're not going to go away. And I understand there's a war going on, and everyone would like to pretend that nothing can be done other than talk about the war. Well, we're not going to stop our oversight work. And we're not, for instance, going to keep on highlighting the corruption issues as it relates to Ukraine and Russia, because that needs to be part of the accountability in the debate as to who lost Ukraine. Now, I don't know how the war's going to turn out. It probably is not going to turn out as well for the Russians as they like, but my guess is the Ukrainians ultimately are going to be on the wrong end of this war. And the question is going to be is who lost Ukraine? And I would say our corrupt politicians had a big hand in losing Ukraine. Next up, we go from Russia to China. And as I said, the corruption is just endemic in this city. I am not concerned about the COVID pandemic. I am concerned about the pandemic related to government corruption. And it's in all of our federal agencies, including agencies that before COVID no one really thought much about, which are our federal public health agencies. Now, you may recall that Judicial Watch has had a series of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and related disclosures about COVID, and specifically the Fauci agency and other agencies' roles early on in handling the pandemic, what they knew and when about the China's involvement and for good and bad in the pandemic, gain of function research, issues about the vaccines. We're covering the gamut. Judicial Watch is doing much more in the way of investigations, and we've gotten out much more information about gain of function and everything else related to the COVID pandemic at the national level than Congress has done, and frankly anyone else has done. I mean, when I look at the scope of materials we've released, it's really quite remarkable. And sure enough, we've gotten new documents from an ongoing lawsuit that we've had since, when did we file this lawsuit? I guess we filed it last year. And we wanted all records for communications, contracts, and agreements with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And obviously we wanted information about the NIH grants that benefited the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 2 years, and I suspect not many of you who follow Judicial Watch are under the rock dwellers, you know the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a Chinese communist-controlled lab that may or may not have been involved in gain-of-function research. Well, actually, the documents show it was involved in gain-of-function research, funded in part with Fauci's agency's money. And the other big question is, did that gain-of-function research or other research, the tools of which U.S. taxpayers help subsidize, result in the manufacture or creation of the COVID-19 virus? There's a big debate as to whether the virus is naturally occurring and that's how it emerged and infected the human population, versus it being manufactured or engineered in a way and then it escaped from a lab, either Wuhan or somewhere else, and resulted in the epidemic. Judicial Watch has uncovered records from Fauci's agency that show that China was no friend of transparency early on in the pandemic. And this information has been withheld from the American people for over 2 years. The records show that China withheld key information about COVID and how it was spreading from their alleged colleagues in the international health community, including NIH. And this information could have helped us protect America better and, frankly, everyone else in the world. The documents show that in 2020, China was withholding the COVID information I'm talking about. So this is the early part of January 2020. It was a little bit less than a month after it was officially acknowledged by China that there was something up. And this is a State Department document that was produced to us by Fauci's agency's people that show that they knew, because they are passing along and discussing in the document, that China was not a good friend here. The document shows that on January 8th, Dr. Ping Cheng, P-I-N-C-H-E-N, now she's a very important person, probably the most important person in this debate that you haven't heard anyone talk about other than Judicial Watch, because she was Fauci's top person in China during much of the COVID outbreak, certainly when it first emerged. So I didn't know this until I saw her in Judicial Watch documents, that Fauci's agency, the National Institute for Allergic and Infectious Diseases, had a representative, a permanent person, practically speaking, there in China, working with Wuhan and kind of engaging in half-baked spy operations while they were actually funding them. So they were concerned about Wuhan while funding it. It's completely crazy. So after the outbreak, there's a document on January 8th, 2020, Dr. Chen emails her senior colleagues at Fauci's agency with the subject line, "PRC response to pneumonia cases shows increased transparency over past outbreaks, but gaps in epidemiological data remain." So more transparency, but less transparency. That's a great government document. So this is Chen's email. She writes to her colleagues, "Hi, here's the cable from the U.S. Embassy Beijing," which means it's a State Department document, reporting on the pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan, China. It has ruled out SARS, MERS, and the flu. Redacted confirmed, so there's a name redacted. It is a viral infection, and there's another redaction. The cable contains SBU information, so sensitive but unclassified. So please don't distribute it widely. So this is a cable she shared with her colleagues from the State Department, analyzing and describing China's response to the Wuhan pneumonia, as it was called, that was emerging. The summary of the cable states, and it's worth reading in full because it shows you just how unhelpful China was early on. While PRC, People's Republic of China officials, have released timely and open general information about the outbreak, a lack of epidemiologic data, including an epi curve, a summary of dates of onset of illness, characteristics of infected individuals, and other basic epidemiologic information, hinders better risk assessment and response by public health officials. Again, hinders better risk assessment and response by public health officials. Authorities have also not released information on how they are defining a case. Of course, we had that problem here in the United States too, which is ironic because the CDC is terribly corrupt. Given these gaps in detailed information to date and the lack of a final confirmed pathogen, the risk to the United States and global health is difficult to assess at this time. So listen to that paragraph. The Chinese have generally told us about this Wuhan pneumonia, but they're withholding key data that would help us figure out what the risks are to the American people. As of January 7th, the Wuhan Health Commission has reported 59 local cases of pneumonia with unknown cause. Note, Wuhan, a city of approximately 11 million people, is the capital of central China's Hubei province. According to the Health Commission, some patients are vendors who work in the
Huanan Seafood Market, which also sells live exotic animals, including beavers, snakes, porcupines, and deer. Health officials state there has been no confirmed human-to-human transmission of the disease and no cases among health workers. Laboratory investigations have ruled out influenza, avian influenza, SARS, MERS. I guess the MERS is short for the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and other common respiratory pathogens, and are awaiting final pathogen results. Again, PRC officials on December 31st, 2019, alerted WHO to the pneumonia outbreak. So actually, this email was only a week after it became publicly acknowledged, at least by the Chinese. WHO contacts told embassy officials that PRC health departments continue to provide information about the outbreak in accordance with WHO's international health regulations. While China has been forthcoming with standard information, WHO contacts note they have not received more detailed and potentially useful information, again, such as epi curves or other epidemiological data. The flow of official PRC information on this outbreak is limited to that coming from the Wuhan Health Commission and National Health Commission. So, trouble in China, big trouble. And we're not told about this for 2 years. Now, you may recall that Judicial Watch uncovered shortly after this came out that WHO or one of its subcomponents was trying to put out a press release praising international cooperation on China. And WHO sent an email, or one of the top people there, sent an email to Fauci saying, hey, take a look at this release. We want to send it out. And please note in particular, and I'm paraphrasing since I don't have it in front of me, the special praise we dole out to China here. So China is withholding information, and WHO knows it's withholding information. Fauci's agency knows it's withholding information, and shortly thereafter, they start praising China anyway. You can bet Trump wasn't told this crap. On January 30th, they knew that it was getting worse because Chen, again, Ping Chen, Fauci's person in China, forwards to her colleagues a detailed situation report on the Chinese government responses to the virus that was spreading across the country. So this is less than a month later. So they had travel restrictions, quarantine measures, and all sorts of other things that were taking place in cities across the country, including Beijing and Shanghai and major cities like that. So this is also interesting. On April 15th, 2020, an official whose name is redacted sends an email to colleagues labeled Wuhan Institute of Virology cables. As I'm sure you are quite aware at this point, the cables from a State Department agency wrote on the Wuhan lab and the concerns we had about the findings of the papers on bat coronavirus research has become big news recently. So they all know that there's an issue with Wuhan Institute. Again, these are documents they're only turning over to us now, even though they were created on April 15, 2020. Another major find that we have in these documents is that we were helping Wuhan in all sorts of ways in the years running up to the outbreak of COVID. And we weren't just helping Wuhan, we were providing support to other labs and frankly, similarly dangerous labs all over the world, including in India. An official forwards an email exchange, for instance, in April of 2018, a cable on the Wuhan Institute of Virology visit. China, and this is how the cable begins, the summary. China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, a global leader on virus research, is a key partner for the United States in protecting global health security. Its role as an operator of the just-launched P4 lab, which, as you know, or you may know, means that it's one of the most highly secure labs in terms of its ability to handle the most sensitive pathogens. The first such lab in China opens up even more opportunities for expert exchange, especially in light of the lab's shortage of trained staff. We were staffing Wuhan's lab. Let me say that again. We were staffing and training Wuhan's lab. And we saw this as an arm of the U.S. government for all practical purposes when you look at material like this. How else would you interpret it? The cable also mentions that there is a U.S. Centers for Disease Control supported P4 facility in Pune, India, Pune. I didn't know that. Did you know that? What are they doing in Pune? I mean, do you trust Fauci's agencies or any of these deep state public health agencies to monitor what these labs are doing? I don't. And we're going to stand up a second lab in Harbin. Now, I've never heard of Harbin, Harbin. Well, it's another city in China. It's the capital of a major province in northeastern China. And I've seen other documents, and they're all on our website. So we don't hide this from you, the American people, unlike the government. We get these FOIA documents, we put them out there. So sometimes you get people saying, well, Judicial Watch, you can't trust Judicial Watch. How can you not trust us? We put the documents out there. And you can figure out what they say is just as well as we are able to do. And but the documents that we previously have found shows that we were helping the biological, what I consider to be weapons-oriented research, but they don't want to call it that. But what else would it be there for? They're pretending it's all just civilian research. Do you think the Chinese are doing this for civilian research purposes? I'm sure in part they are. But what else do you think they're doing it for? Defense and offense. But when you look at the funding and look at the scope of our work, I don't even know how the Chinese could have opened up these labs without U.S. taxpayer funding. As I said, they look to be arms of the U.S. government, practically speaking, namely Fauci's agency. The cable notes that Chinese officials described the Wuhan lab as a regional node in the global biosafety system and said it would play an emergency response role in an epidemic or pandemic. So their actual response role turned out to be suppressing information that we needed to figure out what the heck was going on in Wuhan with this COVID lab. And we still don't have the information. I mean, there have been 2 studies that were put out recently, interesting ones, and I encourage you to look them up because believe it or not, I don't necessarily think it's a matter of faith that that we have to believe that this COVID emerged out of a lab versus naturally. So it could be either one. I don't know. And if it is one versus the other, we take steps accordingly. But there are 2 new studies that have come out that suggest they have some data analysis. Again, that isn't perfect because of China's suppression of information that highlight further highlight the possibility that it didn't merge in that area around that wet market that's been famously highlighted. But even they note that they still don't have enough information, although they think their work is persuasive. It continues, experts from the NIH supported P4 lab at the University of Texas medical branch have trained Wuhan lab technicians in lab management and maintenance, institute officials said. NIH was a major funding, along with China's National Science Foundation, of SARS research by the Wuhan Institute of Virology's blacked out. Finally, the cable notes, with the EcoHealth Alliance, which of course has been linked to this Chinese gain-of-function research that has been largely confirmed by documents uncovered by Judicial Watch, a New York City-based NGO that is working with the University of California, Davis to manage the plans to visit Wuhan to meet with Shi Zhengli, who was a major official at Wuhan. And well prior to the outbreak, again, going back another year to 2017, one of Fauci's top people, Gray Hanley, I think he was number 2 at the agency, forwards to colleagues a State Department cable titled China's Interest in the Global Virome Project Presents an Opportunity for Global Health Cooperation, which another official notes seems relevant to biobanking, IP, which is typically short for intellectual property, pandemic flu, and a bunch of other issue areas. The summary of the cable begins, the proposed Global Virome Project, an international non-governmental organization built on a decade-long prototype initiated by the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is another agency involved in funding these labs and similar research, seeks to address vulnerability from emerging diseases by creating a global database of viruses of animal origin and identifying those pathogens with greatest potential to jump to humans through sequencing their genomes, understanding the ecology involved in transmission, and assessing risks to humans. This knowledge could then be used to devise treatments and countermeasures. So I suspect that, well, I don't suspect because this is what they say, U.S.-China collaboration on this project is an opportunity to lead innovation in science, collaborate with China, and potentially contribute to scientific breakthroughs. So they were using this project, again, funded largely by the U.S. government, to work with the Chinese, our great friends, the Chinese. That turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes, assuming it was done in good faith, in world history. The records include also an email between the U.S. Embassy in Beijing back again in February 2018, in which NIH officials were monitoring the Chinese media. And some of this we've talked about before. They were looking at highly pathogenic viruses at the Wuhan Institute, so they knew that was happening. A new nanotechnology-based flu vaccine, that sounds interesting, that's been raised before. China advances in human gene therapy, in which China is helping to advance gene and cell therapy and genome editing research by creating novel viral and non-viral vectors for gene delivery and innovative applications of CRISPR technology in a broad range of disease areas. Boy. Imagine if that was applied to the wrong viruses. So there's a lot here, and forgive me for going through it with you, but you're never going to hear about it unless I tell you about it, because the media covers this up. Because Fauci covered it up, and they're protecting Fauci. And what's happening is Fauci's agency gets protected, China gets protected, Fauci himself gets protected, but the American people are left in the dark but for Judicial Watch. So as I've been saying on social media this week, I'm tired of the cover-ups. Now, of course, I've been seeing cover-ups for my 24 years here at Judicial Watch. But there are cover-ups, and then there are cover-ups that place the American people's health at risk. And when they're lying for China and protecting China and not pressing China as they should, as we're facing this dangerous pandemic. Now, we can argue about how dangerous it is and what we should have done in response to it, and you know or you should know where I stand on that. But you know, we need the more information, the better. And we're fighting tooth and nail with Fauci to get access to this information. 2 years. And one of the reasons it's been taking so long to get access to this information is because the government has told us that Fauci and his top people review the documents, which is extraordinary. I'm not aware of that happening before in other FOIA litigation that we've been involved with. We've done more FOIA litigation than anyone on the earth. And I've never heard of anything like that happen before. So we're going to keep on keeping on here. But you should know that Fauci's agency is involved in a cover-up of what it knew and when about China's refusal to cooperate with us. And they sat on this material for 2 years. The State Department has also sat on the material, and you wouldn't know it but for your friendly neighborhood Judicial Watch. One of the other big issues that's really causing a crisis here in the United States are the crime rates. Murders and rapes and so-called criminal justice reform that has allowed dangerous criminals out into the streets to rape, maim, and murder. It's a crisis in our urban areas. It's a crisis all over the place. And Judicial Watch has been trying to highlight these issues through its litigation and FOIA work. And in this case, we've filed a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of a magistrate who was fired for taking steps as a citizen to try to protect the citizens that she's had sworn an oath, I presume, try to protect. We're representing former Virginia Magistrate Elizabeth Fuller against the officials of the Office of the Executive Secretary of Magistrate Services in Virginia for firing her in violation of her First and 14th Amendment rights. So this is a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of essentially a whistleblower. On October 19, 2021, Fuller was fired from her job as a magistrate after commenting to the Alexandria Times as part of a discussion about the publicly available outcome of her own personal 2020 complaint against a bondsman named Niguin. A man named Ibrahim Elkai Bouachi was arrested and indicted by a grand jury in January of 2020 for a burglary with intent to commit murder, abduction, sodomy, strangulation, and rape of a poor woman named Carla Elizabeth Dominguez Gonzalez. And notwithstanding the seriousness of those charges, the Alexandria Circuit Court, Alexandria being a locality here just outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, released this predator on a $25,000 bond in April 2020. So he's arrested for rape and attempted murder, abduction, sodomy, strangulation, and he's held for less than, 4 months and released on a $25,000 bond. Compare and contrast that to the treatment of the January 6th defendants. Need I go any further? Less than 4 months after his release, on January 29th, he reportedly drove to Ms. Dominguez's residence, his victim, and shot and killed her outside her apartment complex. I mean, that's the consequence of these soft on crime policies. People get murdered who otherwise wouldn't have been murdered but for specific policy choices by our courts and the politicians who write the laws. And our lawsuit alleges, and this is the key part, in the immediate days following the news reports about Ms. Dominguez's murder, plaintiff, Ms. Fuller, learned from a police officer in the citizen lobby of the magistrate's office, so in the hallway, that the vehicle and gun reportedly used by Bouachi to murder Ms. Dominguez belonged to the surety bail bondsman, Niguin, who posted the bond for Bouachi's release in April 2020. So the bail bondsman's gun was used and his car was used. On information and belief, the bondsman and the officer struck casual conversation while they were waiting in the lobby when the bondsman said it was his gun and his car that Bouachi used to murder the poor woman. We didn't say that in the release, but in the lawsuit, that's how I'm characterizing it. And the bondsman said he had actually let Bouachi stay at his house while he was away on vacation. So the officer subsequently relayed the information to Ms. Fuller, our client, as part of a casual conversation, basically water cooler a conversation among friendly colleagues. Outside, it wasn't as part of any hearing or any proceeding. It was folks in the hall talking. So, because she's a Judicial Watch client, we tend to take on clients who can't help but do the right thing. On August 6, 2020, in her personal capacity, she filed a complaint with the Commonwealth of Virginia, their Department of Criminal Justice Services division, alleging that the bondsman violated rules and regulations of his licensure as a surety bail bondsman. And on September 1st, 2020, he lost his license. It was suspended and revoked. And so Fuller thought, hey, it's over. More than a year later, this newspaper, the Alexandria Times, local newspaper, disclosed information it obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request regarding the bondsman's involvement, as well as Fuller's complaint, and subsequently approached Fuller for comment in October 2021. So this is a full year after the complaint had concluded. Fuller commented as follows. Niguin, who is a bondsman, came to work in the days following the murder, nearly boasting and joking about the fact that the gun and car belonged to him and that Bouachi had stayed at his home, the murderer or alleged murderer. Bondsman, I think he's been convicted by now. The bondsman was telling this officer about what happened and almost bragging about it. The officer said to me, "You'll never believe what he just said to me." So I said, "I've got to do something about it." I tell you what, if our public officials, if our court officials, if our politicians, if our media, frankly, if our citizens all took that line to heart, I've got to do something about it. Think how much better off this country would be. Think how many lives would be saved. Think how secure our borders would be. Think of the better freedoms we'd have. I've got to do something about it. God bless Miss Fuller. 5 days after the story was published, on October 7th, 2021, she was placed on administrative leave. So she did something about it and got punished for talking about it. And she was fired on October 19th, 2021. Really a summary firing. It's really outrageous. It was claimed then at the time that she had violated Canon 3, Section B6, that states, "A magistrate shall abstain from public comment about a pending, impending, or concluded proceeding in any court or magistrate's office." In early November 2021, Fuller filed a grievance appealing her termination and asked for reinstatement, which of course was denied. Now, we argue that her firing was in retaliation for protected speech, because she embarrassed the court, frankly, and that the judicial canon used to justify her firing doesn't apply to comments made about a public filing made in her personal capacity about a concluded matter. So this is something done in her capacity as a citizen, not as a magistrate judge. So it wasn't about a matter before her. At all relevant times, Fuller was engaged in constitutionally protected speech when she made the comments to the Alexandria Times, which undeniably addressed matters of public concern. Plaintiff enjoys the right of freedom of speech, as guaranteed by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. This includes the right to comment to the Alexandria Times on plaintiff's public complaint filed in her personal capacity about the misconduct of a bondsman and its outcome, and the system's failure to protect a rape victim. Remember, that poor woman is dead. And our client tried to do something about it, and the court system punished her by firing her from her job. I'm going to read you what I wrote as a statement because I think it's worth considering. An innocent woman is dead because she was murdered by a rapist who was let out of jail. And so the Virginia court fires the magistrate who blew the whistle on the court bondsman whose misconduct enabled the murder. Our client, Ms. Fuller, is a hero, and she lost her job in violation of her constitutional rights because she embarrassed Virginia officials over their deadly soft-on-crime bail policies. So you hear about these soft-on-crime policies, and we're trying to do something about at least one person who tried to take a stand against it. And the only reason she was even out there in the public was because intrepid reporters at the Alexandria Times was investigating this outrage. I mean, this was a big story locally for a period of time. And they found out that this magistrate had filed a complaint. So she responded in her personal capacity. And she gets fired? So she needs to get her job back in the least. And lots of other things as far as I'm concerned. So I'm honored that Judicial Watch and our attorneys, and of course, you know, this is what I love about Judicial Watch. I get to come on here and do something I'm sure you're all jealous of doing. Getting to talk about the work that other great patriots at Judicial Watch do. I'm president of Judicial Watch, but we've got lawyers and investigators and media folks and our administrative and fundraising, all this team here. And they do all this work that results in disclosures about COVID and Fauci and China, about Clinton, Obama, and Biden, and wonderful, wonderful lawsuits for citizen heroes like our client, Magistrate Fuller, or former Magistrate Fuller, who blew the whistle on misconduct by court officials, in the case of the bondsman, who was responsible in part for murder. And we're able to do this work, and I'm able to talk about this great work and be able to direct it as best as I'm able and educate you about it because of supporters, Judicial Watch members, people who write us checks. So I'm unembarrassed and unashamed to ask you for your support. If you like this work, I encourage you to support Judicial Watch. Go to our website, judicialwatch.org. You can give us money on Facebook. You can go all over and give us money. You know how to give us money these days. Because this is the sort of thing that we do with your support. And I'm proud to be able to do it. And it's a privilege to be able to do it. It's like I'm not just the president of Judicial Watch, I'm a citizen. And I, as a citizen, am so excited about our work. And I'm sure you are too. So with that, I wish you the best. I hope you have a great week. And I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update.